Spread across 3 days, India's first ever mobile and technology conference, the India Mobile Congress 2018, was held in New Delhi. The conference brought together global leaders, policy makers, stakeholders, and others from the telecom world to reflect upon ways to digitize India and to understand the opportunities and challenges that lie ahead of the fourth industrial revolution. An esteemed panel of top executives discussed and deliberated upon the theme of Connect, Create, Innovate in the context of India's growth story.
Let me start by asking you, Mr. Kumar, since KPMG has put this study together, the opportunities are well articulated in terms of being able to meet the target and realize the aspiration. In order of priority, what do you believe the government needs to do and where can the private sector step in?
Actually, the number one challenge is access to talent. It's very clear that as you move from 4G to 5G, as you take applications across multiple sectors, there's just going to be a tremendous need for new talent. And also in terms of technologies, whether it's AI or blockchain or other kinds of robotics, talent is going to be a very key issue. It could be a constraint, and it looks like it will be a constraint. So that's number one. Number two, there needs to be better standardization. And in many areas, standards do not today exist.
Okay.
So standardization is really key. Number three, our legacy infrastructure will be a hindrance.
Right.
Today, we already sense the lack of throughput. We need much more extensive, even 4G coverage. So that would be number three. Number four, our survey showed, was that there are still various areas where there are regulatory barriers or restrictions, administrative issues, which actually the Secretary Sundarajan spoke very well about.
Yes.
So those would be the areas that we need to address.
Okay, so let me ask you, because Cisco has been a long-term India investor, and what's been interesting in India has been the leapfrogging from 2G straight to 4G and now 5G, and the duration that the transition has happened is perhaps the shortest anywhere in the world. What do you see as the key challenges as we move towards this 5G-enabled world?
Yeah, it's a big challenge, right? And first, I would say I would like to really commend the government and the service providers in India, as well as vendors working together to get to where you've got today, right? Because it is a tremendous success story with the proliferation of smartphones and being able to do that across the entire population, right? But for you to now take the next steps, we absolutely believe that you need to be thinking about some things other than just the access devices, the radios, which are of course very important to deliver those services. But it was mentioned a few times, the IP networks that will support these, which of course is Cisco's heritage.
Yes.
But why it's so important, I think, to India is that to be able to provide the services that you're looking to provide, especially to the rural communities at the price points that you need to, I would advocate that an IP network, a very flat IP network, all the way to the edge of the network is going to be very critical. So we're going to be working very closely and continue to work closely with the service providers. We've made a huge investment here in India with our R&D in Bangalore to be able to bring the engineering community, to your point, the talent that's going to be required to do it. But it's really going to have to be a very, very strong relationship, I think, between the government, the vendors, and the service providers to make that a reality.
What kind of investments do you believe that industry on a whole will need to make to be able to bridge the current gap as well as maximize on the opportunity that the future holds?
Yeah, I mean, look, the typical investments that we do make, right, in developing the right technologies, right? You saw some that were being developed here in India that will be launched. But I think it's around innovation as well, right? Bringing together the talent that we require will need to come from all those constituents working together in a new way to develop what's really required.
Mr. Nair, let me ask you, let me pick up on the first challenge that we just heard Mr. Kumar articulate, and that was the skills gap. And as we look at a world where IoT and AI and robotics is really going to be the order of the day, it's not going to be the exception, do we have the requisite pipeline of talent to be able to fulfill that potential truly?
I don't think the issue is of connectivity. The issue is how do you use what you have to deliver larger impact to the society.
Right.
So my first point is that if we have a myopic view of measuring development purely based on capital invested in new technology, we will get it wrong.
Yeah.
The second issue is that where and how would innovation come? I think the question you're asking about skill gap is less to do with do we have the skills of IoT, data analytics, 4G. Yes, that is relevant. More from an Indian IT perspective on global talent and global capability point of view. But I think from an India point of view, we need a better environment for local innovators to innovate so that they can solve local problems leveraging whatever technology is available.
Okay.
Our education system, whether it is in school, whether it is in college, is knowledge dissemination based system which does not encourage innovation. So irrespective of how much capital you burn, how many new technologies you bring in, whatever use cases you demonstrate, the real impact will really get created if we change the education system to application of knowledge rather than dissemination and acquisition of knowledge.
Sure. Jim, thanks very much for joining us on the panel. At Qualcomm, again, you've been a long-term India investor. As you look at the landscape today, what do you believe are the specific opportunities that Qualcomm, for instance, would like to capitalize on? And what do you see as being the big challenges?
I think, you know, a lot of the big parts behind us right now, which is the development of the core technologies, that brings us to a point where it turns into execution. 5G 2019, it's a reality. The United States, South Korea, China, Japan, etc.
India?
Now I'm coming to India. So I said the tough part's behind us. Now it's about execution. And in India, it's really about how fast does India want to go?
Yeah.
And the government's going to make those determinations. I do think it'll be sooner than people think. And the biggest challenge is going to be how fast can it grow? Not as we talk about the smartphone. That's fairly straightforward. I think we can see that. The biggest challenge is how does the rest of society grow as it relates to industrial IoT and also consumer IoT. And I think in that challenge, the government's going to play an enormous role. If you take a look at any city and you start to notice all the items in that city that are either managed or controlled by the government, yet will be connected in this new 5G world, it shows you automatically that the government will be your biggest customer in many cases, which means the biggest challenge would be, how do we bring this great technology and how do we marry that with many of the government municipalities to really bring it to the citizens of India? That's your biggest challenge.
Okay, Michael, you know, since we're talking about creating this ecosystem, what about the startup ecosystem in this public-private partnership experiment that Jim was talking about? How crucial is it going to be to get the startup ecosystem aligned to this? And I ask you because whether it's Qualcomm or Cisco, you're both betting on the Indian startups as well.
Absolutely critical, right? You know, Cisco has been, from our outset, a combination of our own R&D internally, but then taking that along with the acquisitions that we bring into the company. And certainly the investments we made, we have a multi-billion-dollar investment portfolio in startups. Certainly India is a big part of that. And we brought some of those technologies in, and the key there, as many of us know that have been involved in acquisitions, is being able to pick the right ones that you can actually keep the innovation, because the innovation in many cases is not necessarily just pure intellectual property, it's the people. And keep them in a position where they're willing to stick around and then innovate with the larger portfolio that's out there. But as I mentioned, I mean, it's absolutely critical that we do that. And to your point on education, I forgot to mention, certainly the vendor community, like Cisco, has to step up and help. We have Cisco Academies, over 500 of those across India. We trained over 82,000 and certified 82,000 people. It's incumbent on us to help to bridge that gap as well.
Okay. Vineet Nair, you talked about needing to disrupt the Indian education system. How critical is it going to be to ensure that we get the tech piece right, but also that it is within the ambit of privacy, there's data protection, we are waiting for that bill to be taken up by Parliament. So as we move towards a much more robust digital economy, what would concern you that, in terms of protection, privacy, legislative changes that need to be put in place?
Where our aspirations are very big with all the government schemes which you talked about, but we need to be a bit careful about three things. Number one, you rightly said that the infrastructure stack has to be robust, so that when I want to access my services, I can access my services. I think that's an easier piece. I think the second thing which is very important is, who does this data belong to?
Yeah.
Does it belong to India? Does it belong to the service provider? Does it belong to who? And I'm very clear in my mind the data belongs to India. And the last is the analytics. What are you going to do with that data? And I think that layer we are not even thinking about today. All we are thinking in India is about service provision, about data security. That is critical. But I think if you are not able to leverage the data in time to monetize it and become a world beater, I think we'll miss the bus. So we need all three things to fall in place. The last has to be industry. The stack has to be the government. And the data has to be a policy which the government has to put in place.
So, Mr. Kumar, let me ask you now, since we were talking about the road ahead, and I would request Jim to hand over the microphone to you. You talked about the need for greater standardization. You also talked about some of the regulatory risks. This is a conversation that's happening not just in India, but globally as well. Who has jurisdiction over data if data is the new commodity and data is the new oil? What would your thoughts be in terms of the road ahead? Because we are still in the process of putting legislation in place.
No, it's clearly a very complicated issue. And in previous speeches today, some of the topics were laid out. The importance of security, the importance of sovereignty, and the importance of the individual owning data. I also think, so while we preserve all that, I also think there's a huge opportunity for India, because with our talents in analytics, etc., why can't we be the analysts to the world? Why should we not have access to the world's data? And we need to do that, which will multiply our opportunities. We need to thread the needle in a way in which, we will have to have some kind of provide access to others in a measured way. So I think this is an area of opportunity that we should look at from how could we advance our market share in data analytics.
Well, yes, that certainly is an opportunity for Indian companies as well. But Jim, let me ask you, we've talked about the 5G opportunity, but what else excites you about what you see in India today in terms of emerging technologies and the kind of impact that they can create?
Two things. One is you mentioned data earlier, who owns the data, the security of the data. And when people respond to that, they commonly immediately go to the consumer data. I'll give you another example of data that's even maybe equally or even more important, which is large companies. Large companies' data and even parts of the government. And one of the opportunities I see, especially here in India, is the growth of private networks. I actually think that with 5G, there's going to be a huge market that opens up as it relates to private networks that a company might want to have just to protect their data alone, but at the same time, they'll be able to improve the connectivity on a campus, for example. I do think that's a huge opportunity. The other in general is India is very fortunate. It has a large installed base of engineers. This is not true in every country. And this gives India one huge advantage, which is it's not about adopting 5G. It's not about using the 5G service. They'll do that. But what they'll also be able to do is they'll be able to quickly, with 5G, and with this large installed base of engineers, be able to develop new products and services that can be test-bedded here.
Yeah.
They're successful here, then they can copy and paste and export outside this country.
So if India were to play the role of being this hotbed of incubation or innovation, test bed for technologies that could be developed in India and then exported into the world, what would you bet on?
It is absolutely endless, but I would think that smart cities would be one that India would excel at. And I think that smart cities are readily adoptable in a lot of countries and a lot of cities that won't have that capability, or it's too expensive for them to do it, for a matter. And anytime you look at Industry 4.0, whatever country you're in, the smart city is always one of the first ones to attract it. It has the wherewithal to afford the service and the installation of that business. But it can be created here in that smart city, easy to export.
Okay. How much does Qualcomm intend to invest in India over the next few years?
Lots.
I was hoping for a more specific answer. A number would have been nice. How much have you invested so far?
Oh my goodness, we don't publicly say what we invest, but we do have an extremely large base of engineers here in Bangalore and Hyderabad and Chennai. We also have a public number. We have a pretty significant venture fund here that's over 150 million, and a lot of that's already been committed. The activities of Qualcomm in India are very extensive. We work with all the carriers. We help them on carrier optimization, network optimization, I should say, the venture fund, the large engineering base. Great place to be, and I don't think you're going to ever see us stop that.
Well, that's good to hear. Michael, let me ask you the same question. If India is today positioned as the test bed for innovation, incubation, what excites you the most? And give us a sense of what Cisco intends to do in India over the next few years.
Yeah, look, one of the things that I don't think we've talked about a lot, you have an enormous portion of your economy that is driven by small businesses, right? And those small businesses are going to start to get connected in new ways given what we're putting out here from a network standpoint. So then the question is, how do we then help those small businesses digitize their relationship with their end user customers? And we're working very closely with service providers around the world, including right here in India, in helping them to devise ways to do that. So not just provide them basic connectivity services and voice services, but give them the opportunity to develop a relationship with their consumers of their businesses in a way that they can digitally market to those consumers, have a relationship with them that is much more fulfilling, and give them the type of opportunity. If you run a coffee shop here in India, why can't you do what Starbucks does with their customers? When they come in, they associate with your network, they're able to get your email address, they're able to now develop a relationship with you, a digital relationship. And that's something that I think service providers are really well positioned to do here in India.
Okay, and what can we expect in terms of Cisco's investments over the next few years?
Yeah, I mean, a continued, a huge investment. We have well over 10,000 employees, another 20,000 contractors, engineers working here. We see increasing that investment, not only because this is such a great growth opportunity for the company, but as you said, the innovation that's coming out of here, the ability to move very fast into some of these spaces, in some cases skipping technology generations, that is very intriguing to Cisco.
All right, Vineet Nair, how many more schools do you hope to impact or link using the power of technology? And if I would ask you to prioritize for us or draw up a roadmap of innovation, connected, and of course shared, what would that roadmap look like?
So right now, Sampark Foundation is in 76,000 schools, and in the next 2 years, based on the MOUs we have signed, we will be in 200,000 schools. We would be touching the lives of 2 crore children. And I like to use this occasion to thank all the people involved in technology, because all our 2 lakh teachers have a mobile phone and are leveraging that technology to teach children. I truly believe, Shireen, and I can't say enough again and again, that we as a country have problems which are very large in nature. The number of people who are below poverty line or do not have access to equal opportunities is very, very large. The only way we can solve it is putting innovation right at the top of everything and anything which we do. Yes, the intention is to share, the intention is to connect, but for what purpose? Connect whom? For what purpose? And I think if we put innovation on top of all problem solving, then we can solve it at scale. And if we solve them at scale, then we connect with the people who need to be connected, and then we share our wealth with the people who are all Indians rather than a few Indians who get richer and richer every year.
Well, purposeful innovation and purposeful, meaningful technology use is what you're suggesting, and hopefully that will be the road ahead and that will be the way forward. So thank you very much, Mr. Kumar. Thank you very much, Jim, Michael, and Vineet Nair for joining us here this afternoon to talk about the digital opportunity and how we can capitalize it on as a nation, as an economy, and as a people. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who are here in the hall this afternoon. Thank you very much.